It was the kind of morning that makes a man believe in second chances. Not because he has earned one, not because the world owes him one, but because the air is clean and the light is gentle and nothing in the pasture looks like it intends to betray you. The grass is still wet, the sort of wet that soaks the cuffs of your jeans if you walk too far into it and leaves dark half-moons on your boots. Somewhere out beyond the line of trees, a bird keeps calling the same three notes like it's testing the day for faults. The barn smells like old pine and dust and the faint sour of last week's feed. There's a sweetness in it, too. Hay stored high, sun warmed, the scent of summer packed into tight bales and stacked like currency. And the house sits back from the road, not hiding exactly, but turned inward the way wealthy places do. Oh, the kind of place where quiet is part of the architecture, where the driveway curves so visitors have time to consider themselves before they arrive. You can hear the distant hum of a mower from another property, far off, as if the world is maintaining itself without asking permission. Inside, coffee is cooling in a mug that has been reheated once already. The day's calendar, even here, is not blank. There are calls, messages, a rehearsal schedule, or a note about a benefit that needs confirming. There's always somebody who needs something, even when you own land that's supposed to make you unreachable. And then comes the moment. It does not announce itself with thunder. It arrives the way bad news often does. Small, electronic, impersonal. A phone vibrating against a countertop. A screen lighting up with a name, or not a name. Just a number and the suspicion, immediate and sickening, that no one calls at this hour unless something has gone wrong. You can feel it before you answer. The body knows. The skin tightens, the mouth goes dry, the mind runs ahead into possibilities the way a horse bolts toward a fence it can't see until it's too late. The call is picked up, and the voice on the other end is not panicked, not screaming, not cinematic. That's the worst part. Calm voices carry the weight of certainty. There are words like fell and hit and unconscious, words that feel like stones dropped one by one into your chest. There is the clinical precision people use when they're trying not to scare you while they are already scaring you. There is a location, a hospital, a stretch of pavement that had been there for decades and did not care what kind of life passed over it, and suddenly the farm, the grass, the hay, the birds calling their three notes becomes a stage set. Beautiful, still, powerless, the whole empire of quiet you built out of money and taste and distance is useless against one pothole in a city street. The mind goes back to simple arithmetics. How many minutes? How many miles? How fast can a truck go? What can you do in the time between the phone call and the hospital bed to bargain with whatever God governs the fragile machinery of the brain? You think of the old stories people tell about famous folks buying farms, how it's supposed to mean they made it, that they escaped the noise, that they found something true, as if land is truth, as if acreage can wash the world off you. But the truth is, the farm is not an ending. The farm is a vault. You put things there you're afraid to lose. You store your peace there. You hide your family there. You anchor your name to something older than the charts and the applause. You buy a view that doesn't talk back. You tell yourself it's a return to the real. And then, in a single blink, 10 minutes of darkness, the kind a person may never fully remember, you learn that the real doesn't care about your return. Because a head injury is not like a broken arm. You can't wrap it in a cast and mark the days until it's over. A concussion is a disruption of identity. It is the lights flickering in the house of the self. It is the sudden knowledge that the thing you rely on to sing a lyric, to remember a face, gas to walk a straight line across a room, can be shaken loose by bad asphalt and bad luck. This is the part the myth skips. The myth wants a clean arc. The country star and his wife on their Tennessee acreage, safe, blessed, insulated. The myth wants the farm to be a promise that hard work pays and that success, if you spend it wisely, can purchase tranquility. But there is always an invisible workforce propping up tranquility. Hands that mow and mend and haul and hammer. People you do not see in the photographs. There are always checks being written, taxes, insurance, repairs, payroll, the quiet costs of owning land that you are too busy to work yourself. And beneath all that, there is the oldest expense of all, the price the body will demand sooner or later for the privilege of living inside it. So what is a farm, really? When it belongs to someone like Vince Gill? Is it the last honest place in a life spent in show business? Or is it just another kind of business, another form of control, another investment in a world where control is always temporary? And what happens when the thing you thought you bought, peace, turns out to be conditional? This story is about an accident, yes. It is about a bicycle, a pothole, a summer day in Nashville, and a fall that stole 10 minutes and took months, maybe years, to pay back. But it is also about what people do when they are wealthy enough to build a sanctuary and still discover they cannot build safety. It is about the way America sells the idea of rural redemption while the real countryside runs on labor, money, and the same indifferent physics as any city street. It is about how fame turns private pain into public narrative, and how a family learns to live with a changed mind in a world that never stops asking for the old version. Was the farm a refuge from the world, or was it a monument to the belief that the world can be held at bay with enough land and enough gates and enough good intentions? I'm Russ Daniels, plain as a fence post about it. And I'm putting real hours into digging up the details and building toward a steady cadence on stories like this because ranch country still feels like home to me. And I want to make this my full-time work. If you'll make a little pact with me and hit subscribe, it don't cost a thing, and tell me straight, why are you watching this right now? Do you love ranches or something? They say the farm began the way all the good American myths begin. A man gets tired of the noise, tired of the faces, tired of the backstage air that smells like spilled beer and cologne and old money, and he drives until the billboards thin out and the road turns black and quiet. They say he found a piece of land and bought it because he wanted something real. A fence line, a barn, a few honest acres to set his boots in. It makes for a clean story. But the truth is colder, and it has less to do with longing than with timing, less to do with purity than with price. The truth is that a farm in the orbit of Nashville is rarely a return to simplicity. More often, it's a receipt, a conversion, song into soil, applause into acreage, a way for money, restless money, hunted money, to take on the shape of something that looks eternal. And the land itself. The land doesn't care what story you lay over it. It remembers other ones. Long before a stage was built on a hill and strings were tuned against a Tennessee sunset, this country south of Nashville was a place people wanted at all costs. Water, timber, pasture, a place to settle and to hold. Men came into it with maps and hunger, They came with papers and rifles. They came with the old American certainty that if something is beautiful, it ought to be owned. The soil has been bought and sold and fought over long enough that even the quiet feels inherited. So when people say Vince Gill's farm, don't picture some lone man out there with a shovel and a sunrise. Picture the geography first. Middle Tennessee, Williamson County. Franklin, rolling land that looks like it was designed to soothe you, on the kind of landscape that can trick you into thinking history was gentle here. It wasn't. It just learned how to wear its violence politely. Now picture the era, late 20th century into the early 21st, when the countryside around Nashville began to change its clothes. People call it growth, the way they call a fever warmth. From 1980 into the 1990s and on toward 2000, the place filled up with a new economy, offices, retail centers, medical campuses, hotels, restaurants, professional services, the kind of development that doesn't smell like manure or wood smoke. It smells like fresh asphalt and air conditioning and printed contracts. Franklin wasn't turning into a frontier, it was turning into a corridor, close enough to Nashville to feed off its money and music and industry, far enough away to sell the fantasy of distance. A man could live out there and still be at a meeting downtown in under an hour if traffic didn't decide to make a liar out of him. The numbers tell the story with a bluntness no poet can improve. In 1990, Williamson County held 81,021 people. 10 years later, it held 126,638. That's 45,617 more bodies in a single decade, 56.3% growth. Not a slow drift, a surge, the kind of surge that changes everything you can't easily measure. Road noise, school crowding, land prices, the value of being not too far from where the money is. Franklin itself doubled even more dramatically. In 1990, 20,098 people. In 2000, 41,842. That's 108.2% growth, more than double in 10 years. It kept climbing. 62,487 in 2010, 83,454 in 2020, and by a 2023 estimate, 90,092. From 20,098 to 90,092 in a little over 3 decades. You can't have that kind of multiplication without something getting eaten. They call it progress, and maybe it is. But progress has teeth, highways widen, interchanges bloom like metal flowers. Malls rise where fields once breathed. Historic places get saved sometimes. Sometimes they get moved. Sometimes they get bulldozed. Cemeteries get hemmed in by parking lots. Old farmhouses become properties. The past becomes a theme, a decorative style, an aesthetic you can buy and install. And in the middle of all that, a celebrity farm is born. Not in a vacuum, but in a market. Here's another set of numbers, modern ones, and they matter because they reveal the lie behind simple living. In this part of Tennessee, you're not buying a farm the way a poor man buys a farm. You're buying into one of the most desirable counties in the state. Median home values sit around $673,700. Typical monthly mortgage costs hover around $2,571. Median household income runs around $131,202. Poverty rates can be down around 4.9%. There can be over 100,000 housing units in the county and close to 2,000 building permits in a year like 2024. Permits like drumbeats, build, 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 that's not the frontier. That's a pressure cooker with green paint on it. So why does the myth persist? Because America loves to tell itself that wealth can be redeemed by rural imagery. That if you buy enough land, you're not just rich, you're rooted. You're not just successful, you're humble. You're not just famous, you're a steward of something older than the industry. But land at this level isn't just land. It's insurance, it's image, it's distance. It's a way to turn a career, something volatile and loud and dependent on other people's attention, into something that looks stable. A man can lose radio play. A man can age out of the spotlight. A man can watch the business change its rules while he's still learning the old ones. But land feels like it will still be there. And that feeling is what people pay for. The other thing they pay for is privacy. And privacy is expensive in ways most folks don't count. Fences, gates, cameras, landscaping, maintenance, insurance, taxes, the labor that keeps the place from falling apart, the labor nobody sees in the photographs. Because a celebrity farm doesn't run on romance. It runs on work, real work, paid work, often unglamorous and repetitive. Somebody mows. Somebody fixes broken boards and sagging hinges. Yeah, somebody checks drainage after storms. Somebody calls the tree service when lightning splits an old oak. Somebody deals with paperwork you never see, permits, contractors, insurance riders, liability. Somebody makes sure the illusion of calm is never interrupted by the reality of systems. And then, because this is America, there's the next step. The land becomes a platform. By May 13th, 2021, the farm isn't simply a private refuge. It hosts a special edition of a songwriter series tied to the Bluebird tradition. Music people gathered on private land, a new performance pavilion on a hill, and a view of Middle Tennessee so pretty it almost feels like a sales pitch. The pavilion matters. A pavilion means you didn't just move to the country. You built something that can hold an audience. You turned the farm into a venue. And once it's a venue, it's also a machine. It can raise money. It can produce moments that get talked about, written about, shared. The farm becomes not merely property, but narrative. By December 2nd, 2024, the farm is again described as a place where music lovers gather for a cause. An event supporting hospice care with charity care numbers up near $1.5 million annually. The language is warm, community, compassion, beauty, and it might all be true, but it is also power in its softest form. Wealth used to host, to convene, to be seen as generous, to do good while reinforcing a kind of modern aristocracy. Not castles, not titles, but acreage and access. So the origin story is not a single romantic purchase. It's a collision between private longing and public economics, between a man's desire for quiet and a county's appetite for growth, between the myth of simple living and the reality of money converting itself into land, because land still carries the oldest American promise: control. And that's the first hard truth you have to swallow before the later ones arrive. The farm is not the opposite of the industry. It's the industry's afterlife. It is what happens when the applause turns into something you can fence. And it leaves a question hanging there, steady as a gate latch, waiting to be tested. Was it a sanctuary? Or was it a wall, built carefully, paid for dearly, meant to keep the world out, right up until the day the world found a way in anyway? They say he was born with a guitar in his hands. That's how Americans like it. talent as a lightning strike, genius as some clean miracle that excuses all the ugly arithmetic underneath. But the truth is, a boy doesn't come into this world holding anything but air. What he holds later, what he keeps, comes from whoever is around long enough to teach him, and from whatever fear or hunger keeps him practicing when other kids are asleep. Vince Gill entered the world on April 12, 1957 in Norman, Oklahoma, the youngest child in a house where music was not some exotic dream, but a common tool, like a hammer, like a pocket knife. His father, Stan, wore the straight face of the law, a judge, the kind of man who knew how to listen to people lie and still keep his pen moving. He played guitar and banjo too because men contain multitudes and because Oklahoma has always been full of people who work a day job with one hand and keep a second life alive with the other. His mother, Jareen, sang and played harmonica. Small instrument, big ache. The sort of sound that can turn a kitchen into a church and a living room into a highway at night. This was not the mythic West. It was the practical one. Post-war Oklahoma, where the wind doesn't ask permission and the horizon teaches you early that distance is real. Summers that come in hot and bright like a punishment. Winters that scrape the skin. The smell of red dirt when it rains. The flat patience of neighborhoods stitched together from mortgages and hope. Somewhere in there, in a house like millions of others, the radio mattered. The family listened to the Grand Ole Opry the way some families listen to sermons. Voices traveling through the dark, turning ordinary rooms into someplace larger. He was a small boy with a borrowed instrument at first, a guitar his grandmother owned, not his, not bought with intention. I was just there, available, like a door left unlocked. At 5 years old, he learned to pick out Old Shep on it. 5. That's a number people say and don't feel. 5 is still baby fat on the hands. 5 is still learning what sadness even means. But there he is, fingers pressing down on strings hard enough to leave little half-moon dents, chasing notes like they're animals you might lose in the brush. And the thing about a judge's son is, the household has rules even when it's loving. There is a quiet discipline to it, not cruelty, just expectation. The father teaches him chords and timing the way other fathers teach a boy how to change oil or shoot straight, patient until they aren't, because the lesson is never only about music. It's about control. It's about showing up. It's about earning what you say you want. There are little scenes you can almost smell. A lamp on in the corner of a room after dinner, the rest of the house dim. The father's hands, broad, sure, turning the neck of the guitar into position, showing the boy how to place his fingers so the chord doesn't buzz. The boy's face tightening in concentration, the sharp sting when the string bites his fingertip and he pulls away, offended by pain like it's some kind of insult. And then the father says, without raising his voice, something like, "Try again." Outside, Oklahoma is doing what Oklahoma does, wind running across yards, lifting grit, rattling a loose gate latch. Inside, the boy keeps trying. He brings the guitar to school like it's a secret he can't keep. Show and tell becomes performance, the kind that makes other kids stare. He plays "The House of the Rising Sun," a song that already carries the weight of a ruined life, and he's still a child. Imagine that. A boy in a classroom, chairs scraping, chalk dust floating in the light, singing about sin and regret like he's old enough to have earned either one. He's not. He's just learning the shape of feeling. And the household is not only music, it's also the ordinary American mix of ambition and tenderness. They listen to rock and roll too because no family is pure. They listen to what's on the radio because the radio is the river everybody drinks from. They live the kind of life where you go to work, you eat dinner, you do your chores, you try to be decent. And somewhere under that, a boy is building a second self out of sound. Then comes December 1967. A lot of lives pivot in small, domestic moments that never make the history books. A Christmas tree in the corner, pine needles pricking the carpet, wrapping paper torn and piled like shed skin. A boy of 10 years old, 10, gets his first real guitar as a gift from his parents. Not a toy, not a beginner's compromise, a professional instrument. A Gibson ES 335 electric guitar, the kind of thing that has weight when you lift the case, the kind of thing that smells like lacquer and felt and possibility. You don't hand a boy something like that unless you see what he is becoming and you decide to feed it. Think what that means economically, even if no one says the number out loud. A judge and a mother in Oklahoma in 1967, choosing to spend real money on an instrument. Not because it will pay the bills tomorrow, because they believe, because they're willing to gamble on a child's hunger. The boy opens the case and the world changes shape. Not dramatically, not with angels, but in the quiet way it changes when you realize you have been taken seriously. There's a kind of burden in that, too. A gift like that doesn't just give you joy. It gives you obligation. You can feel it in the way a child suddenly holds himself more carefully, afraid of dropping the thing, afraid of failing it. He runs his thumb along the edge of the body. He tests the strings. The sound is bright and raw, not yet tamed by years of sweat. He looks up, and there's his father watching him with that measured face, love disguised as expectation. By 16, he's already out in the world with other teenagers chasing bluegrass, music that moves fast and cuts clean. 16 is a dangerous age for a musician because it's the first time you realize you might not be playing for fun anymore. You might be building a life. The nights get later, the rehearsals get longer, the rooms get smokier. The older players are not gentle. They don't coddle talent. They test it. And all through this, under the story people like to tell, the sweet story of music and destiny, there is another presence in the house. The fact that boys don't grow up alone. They grow up around other boys and men, older brothers, half-brothers, friends who drive too fast and laugh too loud. The household contains more than one future, and not all futures are kind. Because while one child is learning how to make a clean G chord, another might be learning how to live like consequences don't apply. And in a country built on speed, on cars, on highways, on the American idea that you can outrun anything if you press the pedal hard enough, there's always a moment coming when the math of velocity meets the physics of steel. So what was this early life, really? This boy in Oklahoma with a judge for a father and a guitar in his lap? Was it a simple origin story, clean as Christmas morning and bright as a new instrument? Or was it the calm before a lesson so brutal it would tattoo itself onto the family forever? They like to tell you tragedy arrives with fireworks, with screaming tires and shattered glass and a neat headline you can point to later. They like to tell you it for the story's sake, that a family breaks in one clean moment and then spends the rest of the years rebuilding like carpenters. But the truth is uglier and quieter. The truth is that tragedy often begins as an errand, as an ordinary drive, as a boy thinking he has time, and then time takes offense. In that house in Oklahoma, music in the walls, a judge's restraint in the father, a mother's songs drifting through chores. There had been a rhythm to things. Not peace exactly. Peace is a rare animal, but routine, structure, the kind of order people mistake for safety. Vince is still young then, born April 12th, 1957, a boy learning the rules of sound. By December 1967, he's 10, opening a guitar case on Christmas morning, touching the lacquered curve of a Gibson ES 335 like it's a living thing. 10 years old, and the adults around him are already making investments in the shape of his future. They don't say it that way. They just hand him the instrument and watch what he does with it. But every family has its wagers. And then around the time he's 11 in the late 1960s, another wager goes bad. It isn't Vince in the car. That matters because guilt loves to shop for angles. It isn't even something a child can control. It is his older brother, a car, a road, Oklahoma light that can be blinding in the wrong hour and black as ink at the wrong minute. You can picture it without needing the exact mile marker, because America is full of that road. 2 lanes, a shoulder that crumbles into gravel, the faint smell of hot rubber, telephone poles ticking by like metronomes. People drive like the future is guaranteed. That's the lie of youth. And sometimes it's the lie of middle age, too. The call comes the way these calls always come, sharp, clean, and carrying a weight no one on the line knows how to hold. A voice, maybe a friend, maybe a deputy, maybe someone whose hands are still shaking, saying words that don't make sense together. Accident, hospital, unconscious. The words tumble out in a plain order, and the mind refuses them at first like the tongue refuses a bitter pill. His father, the judge, hears it and turns into something older than his profession. He turns into a father with a son on a table somewhere, a man who has sat through testimonies and sentencing and still cannot sentence his own fear to anything manageable. His mother goes quiet in that way. Mothers go quiet when they can't afford to break yet. The house changes temperature. The walls don't move. The furniture doesn't move. But everything is shifted. The air becomes thin. The stomach becomes a stone. In a family full of music, the first thing tragedy steals is sound. And then there is movement. Keys, a door opening, the hard slam of it, the engine turning over. The drive to the hospital is not dramatic. It's worse than dramatic. It's repetitive. Highway lines sliding under headlights. The father's hands locked at the wheel. The mother staring forward like if she looks to the side she might see something she can't survive seeing. Hospitals have their own weather, not outside, inside, the dry, recirculated air, the antiseptic bite, fluorescent light that makes every face look guilty, chairs that are designed for waiting, not comfort, a vending machine humming in the corner like a cheap organ. Somewhere in that building, behind doors with small windows, machines are speaking in beeps and numbers, numbers that pretend to be certainty. They are told what families are told in those moments. He's alive. He's badly hurt. We're doing what we can. They are told it may go either way. They are told not to get their hopes up or not to lose them, depending on the doctor, depending on the hour, depending on how well the staff has learned to speak to grief. And Vince 11 years old, still more child than anything, stands in the shadow of the adults and feels the world reveal its true rules. He learns that love does not come with a warranty. He learns that the body is fragile in a way you cannot imagine until you see someone you love lying still. He learns that a brain can be injured and a person can remain alive, and yet not be the same person you knew. He learns that recovery is a word people use because they have to use something. They tell him his brother is in a coma. Coma, a clean word, a clinical word. But what it means is that his brother is present only as a shape, breath going in and out, eyes closed, skin too pale under hospital light. It means days measured not by calendars, but by visiting hours and shifts and whispered updates. It means his mother praying the same prayer until it loses language and becomes sound. It means his father trying to bargain with whatever laws govern flesh, realizing the law books on his shelf have nothing to say about this. The coma lasts for months. Months is a cruel unit of time for a child. A child understands today and tomorrow. A child understands a week as something like forever. But months is the slow grinding down of the idea that things will snap back to normal. Months is the body learning to live with uncertainty like it's a second heartbeat, and all the while, life insists on continuing. School still opens, homework still exists, dishes still have to be washed, bills still arrive in envelopes. The world outside doesn't pause out of respect for one family's fear. That is one of the most brutal facts a child ever learns. The world does not stop. This is where people try to make the myth again. They want to say the accident made him stronger. They want to say it put steel in him. They want to turn his brother's suffering into a neat lesson for Vince's destiny. But the truth is, trauma doesn't forge you like a blacksmith forging a blade. Trauma fractures you, and then you learn how to keep functioning with the crack running through you. If he plays guitar in those months, and a boy like that often does, it isn't because it's heroic. It's because it's the one place where his hands can do something clean, press a string, make a chord, create an order the hospital will not offer him. In music, at least, he can decide what comes next. In music, at least, he can hold time. When his brother finally wakes, it isn't like in movies. It's not a sudden miracle where everyone laughs and cries at once and the sun pours through the window like God showing off. It's slow. It's confusing. It's a new family learning how to be a family again. A brother alive, but altered. A household rearranged around care, around caution, around the knowledge that the human mind can be knocked loose from itself. And once you've learned that, once you've watched the brain become the battleground, you don't walk through the rest of life the same way. Even joy gets a shadow. Oh, even success carries an undertone. It can all vanish. It can vanish without reason. So when Vince Gill eventually leaves Oklahoma and steps into the machinery of Nashville, when he starts turning songs into a livelihood, when the art becomes commerce, what is he really chasing? Is he running toward music because it's what he loves, or because it's the only place he ever found control in a world that proved, when he was 11, that control is a lie? They say Nashville welcomed him, that it opened its arms the way a church opens its doors. They say a man with a good voice and a steady right hand can walk into town, and the town will recognize him like kin. But the truth is, Nashville doesn't welcome you. Nashville measures you. Nashville clocks you in. Nashville asks what you can do on a Tuesday at 10 a.m. Oh, it's with a red light, burning in a studio, and 5 other musicians waiting for you to be worth their time. It's not a city built on dreams. It's a city built on product. Songs cut to length, hooks sharpened, feelings packaged, priced, and shipped. In 1983, Vince Gill finally moved to Nashville. Not a kid anymore, not green enough to believe in miracles, but not established enough to refuse the grind. He arrived with a wife, Janice, and a daughter, Jenny. And whatever money a working musician can scrape together when the work has been real but the bank account never quite believes it. He came from Oklahoma with that old inland stubbornness in him, the kind that can pass for humility until you see how hard a man can push when he decides he's done being told no. Nashville in 1983 is not the neon theme park it becomes later. It's still a company town disguised as a music town. The streets around Music Row have a quiet, office park plainness to them. Low buildings, lawns, a feeling that everything important happens indoors behind doors with frosted glass, where the air smells like coffee and paper and somebody else's cigarette. He would have learned the first lesson fast. Nobody here cares how much you want it. Want is cheap. Everybody wants. The city is full of wanting. The second lesson comes right behind it, like a foreman stepping closer to speak low. You don't just sing here. You do the work. You show up. You play on other people's songs. You learn the language of charts and keys and counts. You learn to keep your mouth shut when the producer is talking, and you learn to speak when the producer asks for something and everyone else is suddenly staring at you like a jury. In the early 80s, he's in Rodney Crowell's orbit. Crowell's band, the Cherry Bombs, a tight circle of players who know how to make a stage sound like a runaway freight train and a studio sound like it's alive. That's where he meets Tony Brown and Emery Gordy Jr., 2 men who would become something like architects in his life. Producers, yes, but also translators between raw talent and the machinery that can monetize it. There is a moment, whether you can locate it to a day or not, when a musician learns what producer really means. It means the person who decides whether your voice gets to live. It means the person who can spend your future in the present with a nod. It means the person who can hear a thing in your playing you didn't know you were doing and then demand you do it again, exactly, but better. And then the paperwork comes, a record deal with RCA. A signature that looks small on a page that will take years of your life. No fireworks, no choir, just an office, a pen, a hand that sweats a little no matter how calm you try to look. You sign, and the city doesn't clap. The city goes back to work. Early the following year, early 1984, his first single lands on the country charts, a victim of life's circumstances. It peaks at number 40, not a triumph, not a failure, a foothold. The kind of number that tells you 2 things at once. Somebody out there is listening, and it still isn't enough. That same year, 1984, RCA Nashville releases an EP called Turn Me Loose. It runs 26 minutes and 24 seconds. 26-24, a small slab of time carved out of a man's life and pressed onto vinyl like proof of existence. The title track doesn't crack the top 30. It reaches number 39. Oh, Carolina reaches number 38. The first single, Victim, stays at number 40. These are not glamorous numbers. They are workman's numbers. They are the sound of a career starting to breathe on its own without yet standing up. And listen to the names in that room. because this is where the myth of the lone genius dies, if you're honest about it. Richard Bennett on guitar, Hank DeVito on steel, Tony Brown on electric piano, Emory Gordy Jr. on bass, Larry London on drums, Emmylou Harris singing background like a halo you didn't earn, Carl Jackson, Herb Pedersen, voices and hands you'll never see in the spotlight, stacking the sound like bricklayers. That's Nashville. A song is not a solitary thing, it is a crew. This is how the factory runs: a phone call in the morning, a session at noon, another at 3, a writer's appointment at 5, a show at night, if you still have a voice left. The studio is cold, always cold, because tape and gear like stability more than comfort. The lights are hard. The coffee tastes burnt by design. The talk is technical. Tempo, key changes, where to leave space for a vocal line that hasn't been recorded yet. You learn to play like a surgeon, clean, efficient, with feeling held back until it's needed. And then there's the other factory floor, the writing rooms. A writer's room is rarely romantic. It's usually a table, an ashtray, a legal pad, and 3 people pretending to be casual while they negotiate the division of future money with their smiles. The language is friendly, but the math is sharp. If there are 3 writers, the split is 3 ways, unless someone brings in a piece already formed and everyone agrees to a different cut. People say fair a lot. People mean survivable. The song is the thing everyone touches, and it becomes property the moment it exists. In 1985, the next step arrives: The Things That Matter, his debut full studio album on RCA Nashville. It runs 30 minutes and 49 seconds, 30:49, and is recorded, at least in part, at the Music Mill in Nashville, one of those rooms where so many lives have been captured that the walls feel haunted by harmonies. It's produced by Emory Gordy Jr., a man who knows how to take a voice like Gill's, smooth, aching, honest, and wrap it in arrangements that radio can recognize. Now the dates start to matter, because the factory stamps everything with time. March 16, 1985. True Love goes out as a single. It reaches number 32. June 24, 1985. If It Weren't for Him, a duet with Rosanne Cash, is released. It reaches number 10, his first top 10 hit. November 18, 1985. Oklahoma Borderline is released. It reaches number 9. These are numbers that change how a man walks into a room, not because they make him better, but because they make other people behave as if he is. Doors open differently when you have proof. Proof is what this town respects. But even then, there's no easing up. Success in Nashville doesn't buy you rest. It buys you more demands, more meetings, more opinions, more people attaching themselves to the heat of your rise. And if you're smart, if you're ruthless in the quiet way that looks polite, you start thinking about ownership, not just of songs, but of the pipeline that songs run through. Because a hit is not only a song, it is a stream of money divided into categories most listeners never know exist: mechanical royalties, performance royalties, publishing, masters, points, the invisible arithmetic underneath the melody. The people who understand that arithmetic tend to end up owning the most, even when they didn't sing a note. And Gill, slow-burning, disciplined, learns that lesson early enough that decades later it still matters. As of June 15, 2021, it's reported that he'd been self-published since the beginning of his career, only then signing a publishing/writer management agreement for the first time. That's not trivia. That's a mindset. A man watching the factory and deciding he'd rather own the machine parts he can. So here's the real shape of the story in these years. A young man with a gift enters a city that turns gifts into inventory. He makes records measured in minutes and seconds. He watches his songs climb to number 40, number 38, number 39, then number 32, number 10, number 9. He works with crews of musicians whose names the crowd will never chant. He learns that art is also paperwork and that the pen can be as important as the pick. And once the checks finally start coming with some weight to them, once the numbers on the chart begin to look like a pattern instead of an accident, what does a man buy if he's trying to turn something fleeting into something that feels permanent? Another song, another guitar, or a piece of land that doesn't move? They say he bought the farm the way a man buys redemption. One decisive morning, one clean handshake, one glance across a field and a sudden certainty, this is mine now, and here I will be safe. That's the version people like. Celebrity as pilgrim, wealth as repentance, land as the altar. But the truth is, the farm doesn't arrive like salvation. It arrives like paperwork. It arrives in a quiet office with a plate glass window and a row of chairs built for waiting. It arrives under fluorescent lights that make every human face look tired and slightly dishonest. It arrives with a stack of documents thick as a family Bible, deed, survey, title insurance, warranties, signatures on signatures on signatures, each one a small surrender to the fact that in America, even a dream has to be notarized. Outside Middle Tennessee is doing what it does. Humid air holding itself against the skin, the sky a pale wash over rolling land. Franklin sits south of Nashville like a polite cousin who got rich and never mentions it. The roads here curve through trees and subdivisions and then, suddenly, through old pasture that still looks like pasture, though the numbers underneath have changed. This is not country in the old sense. This is country that learned to be expensive. By the year 2000, Franklin has already crossed a threshold. The town that held 20,098 people in 1990 now holds 41,842. It has doubled in 10 years. That kind of growth doesn't just add neighbors. It adds pressure. It turns fields into speculation. It teaches landowners to think in commas. It teaches buyers to act fast because the land is being eaten right in front of them. And fame, real fame, makes a man hungry for a different kind of quiet. Not the quiet of loneliness, the quiet of control. Because when you live your life with strangers watching, you begin to crave a place where the world can't reach you without permission. A farm becomes the one purchase that says no. A gate, a long drive, trees as walls, a house set back far enough that even curiosity runs out of gas. But even that story, Vince Gill's farm, is a simplification. The land is tied up in family history and marriage and the slow braid of two lives becoming one. Amy Grant and Vince Gill marry in the year 2000, and suddenly the idea of home isn't just where you hang your hat. It's where you stake a future that has to hold more than one past. Blended family, different careers, different publics, one private ground to stand on, and the farm, hidden trace, sits there like a proposition. It's near the old Natchez Trace, that ancient corridor of travel that predates the country itself, first a ridgeline path, then a route shaped by indigenous trade and movement, then later formalized into the nation's early dream of roads and commerce. That history matters because it tells you what land is for in America: passage, profit, possession. Every acre has been a road for somebody. Every acre has been contested by somebody. So when a famous couple settles on a farm, they are not stepping outside history, they're stepping deeper into it, into the oldest American habit of turning space into identity. But here is what most people miss. The farm is not only a retreat, it becomes a project. On paper, you can buy a farm in an afternoon. In reality, you build one for years. You build it with crews and schedules. You build it with machines. You build it by deciding what the land will do, not just what it will be. By 2014, the land is already being asked to perform a kind of service that has nothing to do with a postcard view. A youth summer camp needs water, fast, and a company comes in and installs a machine capable of producing more than 100 gallons of drinking water a day. 100 gallons? Not metaphor, not romance, actual volume, enough, as it was described, to have a gallon on hand for each camp attendee. That's what a retreat becomes the moment people show up. Logistics, infrastructure, capacity. And as the farm keeps growing, it keeps demanding more. Water isn't just water out here, it's independence. The old rural fantasy is self-sufficiency, and self-sufficiency requires systems. Over the next decade, those systems thicken. They add storage, purification, redundancy, and eventually the number becomes almost absurd in its certainty. Up to 800 gallons of water each day, generated and purified and stored without relying on city infrastructure. 800 gallons. The kind of figure that sounds like a river until you remember it's being pulled out of air and rain and aquifer and turned into security. Land is never just dirt. Land is a collection of problems you choose to solve. And then you get to the hill. Because a farm like this doesn't only hide, it hosts. In the fall of 2020, the work begins on a pavilion, raised not with casual hammering, but with engineering and volume. A structure designed and measured like something meant to last. One account describes it as 111 feet long and 28 feet tall, with a roof line stretching 78.5 feet, drip line to drip line, over 470 southern pine timbers and glulims, over 30,000 board feet of material. A work site spread across 35,000 square feet with a slab of 6,000 square feet. Numbers like that don't belong to a quaint backyard stage. Those are the numbers of a build that expects crowds, expects use, expects a future. And if you listen close, you can hear what's really happening. The farm is turning into a civic space disguised as a private one, a place where people can come, youth groups, shelters, veterans, fundraising events, because the land is being asked to do something more than keep its owners safe. It is being asked to carry purpose. Then comes May 13th, 2021, a songwriter series, a concert. The first public proof that the pavilion is not just timber and math. It's a microphone, it's an audience. It's a night where the view over Middle Tennessee becomes part of the transaction, beauty offered in exchange for attention, and attention converted into money for a cause. This is the golden trick of the modern American farm. It can be sanctuary and stage at the same time. A refugee with a guest list. A private home that becomes public when it's useful, and private again when it's not. Wealth doesn't just buy land, it buys the right to decide who gets close. But the closer you look, the less the myth holds, because a pavilion doesn't raise itself. 800 gallons of water a day doesn't purify itself. A 111-foot roof doesn't stay sound through storms by good intentions alone. The farm becomes a symbol of success, yes, but it also becomes a machine that needs feeding. Labor, expertise, repairs, schedules, staffing, liability, planning. The simple life starts to look like a small institution. And that raises the question the postcard never asks. When the gates are closed and the grass is cut and the lights come on for an event and everything looks effortless, who exactly is doing the work that makes the effort disappear? They'll tell you the farm runs itself. That's part of the spell. That's what people are buying when they buy the idea of country life. They picture a porch and a breeze and a man wandering out with a cup of coffee while the day falls into place around him like a well-trained dog. But the truth is, a place like this is not a postcard. It's an operation. The simple life at scale is never simple. It's systems. It's calendars. It's checklists. It's the quiet tyranny of maintenance because land is always trying to return to chaos. Grass grows. Trees fall. Water finds its way into foundations. Critters chew wiring. A fence gives way in the one spot you didn't walk last week. The world keeps working on your property whether you're home or not. And the only way to keep it looking like peace is to fight back every day. Start at dawn on the morning of an event. Not a concert yet, an event. Even the word carries its own bureaucracy. It's still dark enough that the barn is just a shape. The air is heavy the way Tennessee air gets heavy, like it's holding its breath. A thin mist sits low in the pasture, and the grass is wet enough to soak through the first man's boots before the sun clears the trees. The driveway is quiet for a few minutes, and then the first truck comes up slow, headlights sweeping the fence line like a searchlight. Tires crunching gravel, a door opening, radios crackling, men in ball caps and work gloves stepping down into the damp. And here's the part the myth never shows. The farm wakes up because people wake it up. Someone checks the gate hardware. Someone walks the perimeter in a slow loop, eyes down and then up, looking for trouble, fallen limbs, muddy ruts, anything that'll twist an ankle once the guests arrive in clean shoes. Someone checks the pavilion, power, cables, stage surface, weather exposure. Someone else checks bathrooms. Someone else checks trash stations. Somebody is thinking about liability while everybody else is thinking about beauty. Because when you host, you take responsibility. In America, responsibility becomes paperwork, and paperwork becomes cost. They'll decorate the place like it's effortless. Greenery, lights, little touches that say, welcome. The way a well-run hotel says welcome, quietly, without asking you to see the labor behind it. Tables arrive, folded in stacks. Chairs arrive by the hundreds. Audio rigs come in pieces, black cases with metal corners, and they get rolled across concrete like coffins. A sound crew starts laying cables the way a spider lays web. Purposeful, invisible, designed to carry vibrations that will later feel like magic. And all of this is happening while the owners are still inside the house drinking coffee, trying to hold on to the last minutes of normal. That's not an insult. That's just how it works. If the farm's going to look serene for the guests, somebody has to absorb the stress early, so the calm can show up on time. You can call it generosity, opening your home to people. You can call it community. You can call it charity. But you can also call it logistics. The farm's pavilion, by one account, isn't a little backyard platform. It's a build measured like a real structure, 111 feet long, 28 feet tall, over 470 southern pine timbers and glulims, over 30,000 board feet of material, a work site spread across 35,000 square feet with a 6,000 square foot slab. Those numbers aren't romance, they're intent. They mean the place was designed to hold people, to host them, to let music travel cleanly into the night without falling apart. They mean somebody wanted this farm to do more than be quiet. So when May 13th, 2021 arrives, when that first concert at the new pavilion becomes real, the day doesn't begin with a guitar. It begins with men on ladders, tightening hardware. It begins with women checking lists, counting supplies, confirming arrival times. It begins with trucks backing into place and the hiss of pneumatic tools and the clink of metal on metal. It begins with the unglamorous truth that beauty has to be assembled. And the invisible workforce isn't only carpenters and stagehands, it's groundskeepers who have been working the property long before the event date. It's the person who keeps the gravel graded so nobody's car bottoms out. It's the person who knows where water pools after a hard rain and who fixes it before a guest steps into it. It's the person who understands that a view is maintained, not gifted, that tree lines get trimmed, sight lines cleared, brush managed, weeds fought with steady patience, even water becomes a kind of quiet infrastructure. You hear numbers like up to 800 gallons a day, and you might nod as if it's trivia. But 800 gallons is not a poetic idea. It's weight, it's continuity, it's the difference between we can host and we have to cancel. It's the kind of redundancy that rich people build when they've learned the world is unreliable. Then the guests start to arrive. Cars roll up the long drive in staggered waves, tires soft on gravel, doors opening and closing, voices polite, excited, careful, carrying over the grass, people wearing clean clothes that don't belong to outdoor work, stepping around dew like they can outmaneuver nature. Volunteers direct parking. Someone hands out wristbands or tickets. Someone answers the same question 20 times with the same smile. And somewhere in the middle of it, this is the strangest part, the farm becomes two things at once. It becomes private property and public space. It becomes a home and a venue, a place built for refuge, now functioning as a gathering ground. By December 2nd, 2024, the machine is running again. Another Alive in the Bluebird at the farm. Another night where music and philanthropy braid together. The charity numbers attached to this world can reach into the millions. Figures like nearly $1.5 million in annual charity care, money translated into comfort for strangers. And that, too, becomes part of the farm's identity. Not just a sanctuary for a famous couple, but a platform where their name can pull resources toward a cause. But the machine exacts a price even when it does good. There is always someone sweeping after the last car leaves. There is always someone stacking chairs in the dark. There is always someone hauling trash, wiping down surfaces, checking for damage. It's repairing what guests didn't even realize they broke. There is always the quiet drain of being open, even occasionally, because opening the gates means letting the world's unpredictability onto your land. And that's the deeper irony. The farm is built to control the world's access. And yet, the moments when it matters most, the nights of meaning, the nights of community, require surrendering that control, at least partially. You cannot host without letting risk in. So you start to understand what the farm really is. It isn't just a place, it's a discipline, a constant negotiation between beauty and entropy, privacy and public obligation, sanctuary and stage. It's a fortress that sometimes has to open its doors because the people inside still want to belong to something larger than themselves. And once you've seen how carefully peace is constructed, how many hands it takes, how many numbers, how many moving parts, there's a darker question waiting out there beyond the gate, where the land ends and the ordinary world begins. How long can you keep a life stable inside all that careful planning before a single careless inch of pavement, a single bad patch of road reminds you that control has always been a temporary illusion? They'll tell you it was just a fall, a bad patch of road, a simple accident, the sort of thing that happens to anyone who rides long enough. They'll tell you that because it's easier. Because if it's just a fall, then the world stays reasonable. Then you can still pretend your life is governed by choices and not by the indifferent geometry of asphalt. But the truth is, a fall is never just a fall when it lands on the head. The truth is, the brain is not a bone. You can't set it. You can't wrap it and trust time to do the rest. The truth is that a pothole, one hole in one street in Nashville, Tennessee, can reach into a home, into a marriage, into a whole carefully built piece, and change the rules without asking permission. It's late July 2022. Nashville is hot the way it gets when summer decides to lean in. The heat is not a feeling so much as a presence, a thing that sits on your shoulders and makes every movement cost more. The light is hard. The air tastes faintly of exhaust and cut grass, and whatever blooms are stubborn enough to live next to pavement. A bicycle ride in that weather isn't a grand athletic statement. It's an ordinary act of being alive. A body moving through a city, and lungs working, legs turning over, the mind doing that small, quiet drift it does when the world feels routine. And routine is when the knife goes in. A wheel finds the pothole. It doesn't see it. Nobody sees a pothole until it's too late, because the mind edits the world in your favor. It assumes the road is a road. It assumes the surface will hold. The tire drops. The front end snaps. Momentum, dumb, obedient momentum, keeps going even as the machine beneath you stops cooperating. There is that brief, weightless half-second where the body is not yet hurt, but already doomed to be. And then the impact. There are sounds people never forget. The hollow clap of flesh and bone against ground, the scrape of skin across grit, the bicycle's small metallic rattle as it skitters away, innocent as a thrown tool. Then, often, silence. Trouble because bystanders don't know what to say at first. The mind takes a beat to admit what it's seeing. Someone rushes in, a stranger, maybe two, hands hovering because everyone has heard the rule about not moving someone with a head injury, and fear makes people cautious in a new way. Somebody kneels and says her name, Amy, like saying it can pull her back. Somebody else is already reaching for a phone. This is how modern crisis begins. A screen, a thumb, a 3-digit ritual. 911. The operator's voice is calm. Calm voices are a kind of mercy and a kind of terror. They ask questions that feel obscene in their orderliness. Is she breathing? Is she conscious? Is there blood? And you answer, like you're reciting facts about a stranger's life, even though your hands are shaking and your throat is tight. The operator tells you what to do. They tell you to watch her chest rise. They tell you to keep her still. They tell you help is on the way. Minutes stretch. They always do. Amy Grant, reported later to have been unconscious for about 10 minutes, lies there while the world continues around her. A car rolling past too slowly, a dog barking somewhere behind a fence, the heat pressing down like a weight. 10 minutes doesn't sound like much until you've lived inside it. 10 minutes is long enough for a person's whole life to run through somebody else's head. Long enough for a husband, wherever he is, to become a husband in a sharper, older sense. A man waiting for news he can't influence. The ambulance arrives with that sudden sense of authority. Lights, uniforms, equipment. The paramedics move fast but not frantic. Frantic is for amateurs. They carry their professionalism like armor because they have to. They assess, they speak in clipped terms, they check pupils, they ask questions designed to locate the mind inside the body. They lift carefully a board, a strap. The small indignity of being restrained for your own survival. The gurney wheels rattle on pavement, the door shut, and the siren cuts through the afternoon like a blade. She's taken to Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville. The name has weight because Vanderbilt is where the city sends the serious things, the uncertain things, the things you don't take chances with. The hospital is cold inside, the air-conditioned kind of cold that feels almost cruel against sweat. The smell hits first, antiseptic, plastic, that faint metallic edge you taste when your adrenaline is high. The lights overhead are bright and merciless. There is no romance here. There is only procedure. And somewhere, maybe on a highway, maybe on a back road, maybe standing in a kitchen that still smells faintly of coffee, Vince Gill gets the call. There is no good way to hear words like bike accident. No good way to hear head injury. The mind tries to bargain instantly. It tries to rewrite the sentence while it's still being spoken. But the voice on the other end keeps talking, and each detail makes the world narrower. Late July 2022, unconscious, Vanderbilt, concussion. The voice might add reassurance. She's stable, she's awake now, we're watching her. And none of it lands the way it's meant to, because the only thing that lands is the fact that the head was involved, that the brain was involved. And he has lived long enough to know what that can mean. The drive to the hospital is its own kind of purgatory. Every red light feels personal. Every slow car feels like an insult. The air inside the vehicle is stale, and the hands on the steering wheel are too tight. You can feel your pulse in your fingertips. You can feel old fear rising. Fear with a history. Fear that remembers what happened to a brother long ago. Fear that knows a family can be rearranged in one afternoon. At the hospital, the waiting is the worst part because it is so passive. You sign your name. You answer questions. You sit in a chair made to discourage comfort. You listen to the overhead announcements that mean nothing to you and might mean everything to someone else. You watch doors open and close like the hospital is breathing. When you finally see her, she is there, and she is not there in the way you're used to. A concussion can make a person look normal and still feel unreachable, like a familiar house with the lights on but no one answering from inside. She may speak, she may even joke, because that's what strong people do when they're scared. They offer humor like a peace treaty. But the eyes carry the truth. The eyes carry the fact that something was shaken loose. And when the doctors tell you she'll be monitored, that she's been treated, that she'll go home, briefly hospitalized, the reports will say later, it sounds like closure. It isn't. It's only the end of the first chapter of the injury. Because on the ride back, no siren now, no flashing lights, just the ordinary road again. You understand something that doesn't feel like understanding. More like surrender, that the accident is not over just because the bleeding stopped, just because the scans look acceptable, just because the paperwork says discharge. The accident has moved. It has taken up residence in your daily life. And this is where the farm changes without anyone touching a board or a nail. The sanctuary becomes a perimeter. The quiet becomes a kind of test. Every sound in the night, the creak of a floorboard, the soft shift of sheets, means something new. You start watching for symptoms the way ranchers watch the sky for weather. You start measuring hours. You start counting small signs, fatigue, dizziness, confusion, because now the most important terrain you're guarding isn't the acreage outside. It's the mind inside the person you love. So tell me, was that fall a random misfortune? A meaningless crack in the pavement that happened to catch one wheel on one afternoon? Or was it the moment the body collected its due and forced them to learn, day by day, what it costs to rebuild what you can't see? They tell you recovery is a road, that you get on it, you walk forward, and each day is a little better than the day before. A clean line on a chart, a simple climb out of the hole. But recovery from a concussion isn't a road. It's a weather system. It changes without warning. It comes in waves. It punishes confidence. It rewards caution and then betrays you anyway. Late July of 2022 is when the world cracks. Wheel in a pothole, body in the air, head meeting pavement, and about 10 minutes of darkness that no amount of love can fill back in. The hospital releases her, and the headlines, if you can call them that, treat it like a scare survived. Brief hospitalization, home to rest. She'll be fine. Fine is a word people use when they can't stand the alternative. At home, the first nights are the most honest. Not because the pain is worse then, though it can be, but because the house is quiet enough to hear what you've been trying not to hear. The mind is not steady. The mind is not guaranteed. The mind is a lantern carried through wind, and you start living like you're guarding the flame. You learn to watch the small things, the way she stands up too quickly and then pauses just a fraction, like the room is shifting under her, the way her hand touches the wall in the hallway, not dramatic, not theatrical, just the body, making a quiet adjustment. The way her eyes narrow sometimes, as if light itself has become loud. There are rules that arrive without anyone announcing them. No pushing through, no powering it out. You can't grit your teeth and will your brain back into shape. The old American virtues, toughness, denial, speed, don't help here. They make it worse. The doctor's voice sits in the back of the mind like a caution sign. 12 to 18 months. That's what they say for head injuries. Maybe you'll feel better sooner. Maybe you won't. But the horizon they offer you is measured in seasons, not days. And once you've been told that, you start living differently. You stop making plans the way you used to. You start making contingencies. Even the farm changes. A place that used to mean retreat now becomes a perimeter of care. The same long driveway that once felt luxurious now feels like a buffer from ambulances and strangers. Yes, but it also feels like distance from help if something goes wrong. You listen to the silence differently. You notice how far you are from town, from traffic, from a hospital. The pastoral starts to look less like a painting and more like a practical question. If she falls again, how fast can we get her in? In the mornings, the air outside can still smell like hay and dew, and the beauty can still be real. But beauty doesn't cure neurons. Beauty doesn't make memory behave. And memory is where the injury makes itself known in the most humiliating way. Pain is at least honest. Pain tells you it's there. Memory slips away quietly like money leaking from a torn pocket. You go to grab a word and it's not there. You go to recall a name you've said 1,000 times and it arrives late or not at all. You walk into a room and forget why. You stare at a familiar face and feel the brief panic of not being able to place it fast enough. People who haven't lived through it think that sounds small, a minor inconvenience. But the mind is how you know you're you. And when the mind stutters, it doesn't just inconvenience you, it threatens the story you tell yourself about who you are. So the days become careful, not sad, necessarily, not always, just measured, the kind of measured living that takes constant effort. They manage light, they manage noise, they manage fatigue, because fatigue is the thief that comes for everything: balance, patience, cognition. Some afternoons, she'll feel almost normal, and then she'll overdo it, and the next day she'll pay like a debtor with no choice. The work of recovery rarely looks like work. It looks like sitting down before you want to. It looks like turning down invitations that would have once been easy yeses. It looks like canceling plans without a clear explanation other than, I can't. It looks like accepting that the brain has become the boss, and the boss is unpredictable. And Vince, who has spent decades in a business where the show goes on no matter what, has to learn a different kind of discipline. Not the discipline of pushing through, the discipline of stopping, the discipline of protecting what can't be seen. They keep the household running, meals, calls, chores, the ordinary scaffolding of life. But everything is adjusted around this new center. How is she today? How's her balance? How's her headache? How's her sleep? And then comes the cruel irony. Music, the thing that's always been their language, becomes difficult. Singing isn't only lungs and throat, it's memory, it's timing, it's breath held just so. It's the confidence to step into a lyric and trust you'll find the next line waiting. After the injury, trust becomes scarce. 6 months after the fall, call it January 2023, even if no one circles it on a calendar, there's a moment that says more than any press release ever will. She returns to performing, but she uses a teleprompter, not because she's forgotten how to sing, because the brain, still healing, cannot be relied upon to retrieve everything on command. A teleprompter is a tool, yes. It's also a confession. I'm not back yet. It's a public admission that recovery isn't finished just because you've stepped on a stage. Imagine what that costs someone whose entire life has been built on fluency, on knowing the words, knowing the melody, knowing who she is in the middle of a song. Imagine the quiet anger of it, the embarrassment, the gratitude that the tool exists at all of it at once. And still, she does it. She stands there and sings anyway, because some part of her refuses to let the injury be the final author of her life. That refusal is not inspirational fluff. It's survival. It's identity work. It's saying, I'm still here, even if I have to read my own lines. The public sees the courage. The public claps. The public likes to believe the clap itself heals something, but healing happens in the unfilmed parts. It happens at home, when the day ends and the adrenaline is gone and the fatigue hits like a heavy door closing. It happens in the small disappointments, the missed word, the forgotten appointment, the momentary imbalance on a perfectly level floor. It happens in the way a couple learns to communicate in new signals, subtle, quick, protective, because you don't always want to announce the struggle. Sometimes you just want to live, and through it all, that medical horizon, 12 to 18 months, hangs there like a slow-moving storm. You count the months without meaning to. You mark progress the way a rancher watches a calf gain weight, a little stronger, a little steadier, but still not ready for the hard weather. By the time the mind begins to feel more like home again, by the time you can walk without that faint sway, by the time the words come easier, there's a temptation to believe the bill has been paid. But the body is patient. It keeps receipts. It waits until you start thinking you're safe again, and then it presents the next invoice. So what happens when the concussion finally loosens its grip just enough for them to breathe? And something else, something deeper, rises up from the aftermath to demand its own due. They tell you the danger is past once the bruises fade. They tell you that because Americans need the story to resolve. We need the arc, injury, recovery, return. We need to believe the body is the machine with replaceable parts, and that time is a mechanic who always shows up. But the body keeps receipts. It doesn't hand them to you right away. It waits until you've started to breathe again, until you've caught yourself laughing without checking first if you're allowed to. It waits until you've told a friend, truthfully, I'm doing better. And then it slides the bill across the table like a man in a back room, calm as a banker. The fall is still there in the family air, late July 2022, the pothole, the wheel dropping, the sudden violence of pavement. About 10 minutes of unconsciousness, a number so small on paper and so monstrous when you imagine it as a blank stretch where anything could have happened. 10 minutes where a life can tip from fine to never the same, and no one can do a damn thing but watch the chest rise and fall and hope the brain is still finding its way home. After that, the days become careful. You learn the language of concussion, fatigue, sensitivity, balance, memory, the strange way the mind can feel both present and fogged, like looking at your own life through glass that's been breathed on. You live inside that 12 to 18-month horizon doctors talk about, that long, slow promise that healing is possible but not guaranteed on your schedule. You learn not to brag about good mornings because good mornings can be followed by bad afternoons. You learn to treat normal like a visitor, welcome when it arrives, not trusted to stay. And then, months later, something else starts to whisper. It doesn't announce itself as catastrophe. It rarely does. It arrives as discomfort, a rasp where there shouldn't be one, a sensation in the throat that doesn't match the day. You clear it. You drink water. You assume it's weather or stress, or the ordinary wear of a life spent singing into microphones and talking to strangers. But the whisper keeps returning. If you've lived long enough, you know the difference between a nuisance and a warning. A nuisance comes and goes. A warning persists. A warning repeats itself until you stop pretending you didn't hear it. So you go back to the place where modern fear gets translated into images. The clinic, the scan, the waiting room with its soft chairs and stale magazines. You sit under air conditioning so cold it feels like punishment. You fill out forms that ask the same questions in different ways, as if paperwork can coax truth out of flesh, and then you lie back and let a machine read you. There's a particular loneliness to medical imaging. The body is there, but the person is sent away, told to stay still, told to hold still, told to trust that the people in the other room will interpret the shadows correctly. The machine makes its noises, thumps, clicks, that hollow mechanical rhythm, and in between those sounds you can hear your own blood moving, your own breath trying to stay calm. The results come the way results always come, with a voice trying to sound neutral, assist, a word that sounds almost harmless until you remember where it is and what it can touch. The throat isn't just throat. For a singer, the throat is livelihood, it's identity. It's the place where a person turns feeling into sound and sound into money and money into the life that bought the farm in the first place. Assist is not just a medical detail. It is a threat to the one tool you cannot replace. And so the second blow arrives, not on pavement, but under fluorescent lights, with consent forms and signatures and risks recited like legal disclaimers. It arrives in the language of surgery, a surgery reported later as lasting 5 hours. 5 hours is a long time to be unconscious when you've already learned how much can happen in 10 minutes. 5 hours is long enough for a spouse to go through every memory you've built together and still have time to imagine losing the future. 5 hours is long enough for a waiting room to feel like a lifetime sentence. The morning of it begins early. Hospitals like dawn because dawn is quiet and clean and controlled. You check in while it's still dark outside, while the city is waking up slowly, while the air in the parking garage smells of concrete and exhaust. You get a wristband printed with your name like a label. You change into a gown that offers modesty the way a thin curtain offers privacy. You hand your body over to strangers with kind eyes and practiced hands. There is a moment before anesthesia, before the mind gets shut down, that feels like standing at the edge of water you can't see the bottom of. People say comforting things. They tell you you'll do great. They tell you the doctor is the best. They tell you it's routine. Nothing is routine when it's your voice on the line. Vince sits in that chair. Every spouse has sat in some version of it, trying to look composed, trying to be the steady one, because that's what love becomes in hospitals, a performance of calm, so the person you love can borrow it. He has spent a life around stages and microphones and the illusion of certainty. But there is no illusion here. Only time. Only waiting. Then the doors close and she disappears into the machinery of care. Hours pass in fragments. A nurse comes out with an update. Someone offers coffee that tastes like burnt plastic. He checks his phone and doesn't see messages he can answer. He watches other families come and go, each one carrying their own private war. He hears the same overhead announcements, the same footsteps, the same squeak of shoes on polished floor. The building keeps breathing, and somewhere behind those doors, hands are working, precise, trained, invisible. This is the part Americans rarely honor. We love the famous names, the brave faces, the triumphant return. We forget the surgeons who stand for hours under bright light, the nurses who do the unglamorous care, the technicians who set the instruments. The people who keep the body alive while the person is asleep, 5 hours. When it's done, there is relief, but relief is never clean. Relief is mixed with the new work ahead. Because surgery is not an ending, it's a turning. After, you're different again. After, you have to learn your own body like a man learning a new ranch after a storm. What's still standing, what needs repair, what will never be the same. Recovery from a throat surgery is its own quiet cruelty. You can't force the voice back any more than you can force the brain to heal. You test it cautiously, like stepping onto ice. You hum, you whisper. You try to find the place where the old sound used to live. Some days it returns, some days it doesn't. And all the while, the fear sits there, patient, unblinking, asking if this time the change will be permanent. And the concussion's echoes don't necessarily leave just because another crisis has taken the spotlight. Balance can still be fickle. Memory can still be strange. You can find yourself walking carefully, turning slowly, as if the world might tilt. The body becomes a place you negotiate with rather than inhabit without thought. This is what people don't understand about recovery. It's not one straight road. It's a series of repairs, each one revealing the next thing that was damaged. The body keeps receipts, and it presents them when it wants to. So, after the fall, after the long months, after 5 hours under surgical light, after learning again how to sing and speak and trust your own senses, what do you do with the farm then? Do you close the gates tighter, trying to build a life small enough that fate can't find it? Or do you open the place wider, invite the world in, and turn survival itself into something that can be shared? They'll tell you opening the gates was charity. Pure-hearted, simple, a famous couple letting the common world onto their land like a blessing poured from a clean cup. They'll tell you it was just hosting, a nice thing, a generous thing. But the truth is, opening the gates is surrender. It is letting the world back into a place you built to keep the world out. It is taking a sanctuary, bought and shaped and guarded, and turning it, for a night, into a public square. And there is nothing soft about it once you're close enough to smell the diesel from the trucks and feel the tension in the volunteers' shoulders. The calendar says December 2nd, 2024. But the farm doesn't care what day it is. The farm cares about temperature and wind and whether the ground will hold a line of cars without turning to mud. It's cold enough that morning breath shows, but not so cold it kills the grass. The air has that winter clarity that makes everything look honest. The kind of air that fools you into thinking life is straightforward. Down by the drive, the gate is still closed at first because even on a day like this, control begins with a hinge and a latch. A lock clicked open, metal that gives a little in the hand. The small sound of security becoming permission. The first vehicles in are not guests. They are workers. A box truck crawls up the gravel like it's afraid to wake the land. Headlights wash over fence posts, over dormant brush, over the edges of pasture where deer sometimes stand at dusk and stare like sentries. Tires crunch. A door rolls up, and the cargo is revealed in the plainest way. Folding chairs stacked in towers, tables wrapped in plastic, black road cases with silver corners that hold microphones and cables, and the quiet promise that a song is going to happen here tonight. This is the part the myth never includes. The myth shows you the finished night, lights and trees, laughter, music floating. But before that, there is only labor and cold hands and a checklist The pavilion sits on its hill like a settled thing, as if it grew there. But it didn't. It was built to numbers, not to poetry. 111 feet long, 28 feet tall, a roof line that can stretch 78.5 feet from drip line to drip line. More than 470 southern pine timbers and glulims. At more than 30,000 board feet of material hauled, cut, lifted, and joined until it became something that could hold sound and people and weather. A work site once spread across 35,000 square feet with a 6,000 square foot slab poured like a promise that the ground would not give way. Those numbers are not decoration. They're proof of intent. You don't build that because you want to be left alone. You build that because you plan to gather. Volunteers arrive in waves. They park in the areas already marked. They step out in coats and knit caps and boots that look like they might have been bought for the photo of farm life rather than the work of it. But some of them know what they're doing. You can tell. They move without spectacle. They don't talk big. They lift and carry and keep going. Somebody strings lights. Somebody checks extension cords. Somebody is thinking about where people will walk in the dark so nobody trips. Somebody lays down mats at a threshold where the ground dips. Somebody wipes down surfaces so the place feels clean and cared for, because people read cleanliness as love. A catering crew sets up the first stations, and the smell of food rises into cold air like a bribe. Coffee, hot cider, something sweet with cinnamon that makes you think of safety even if safety isn't real. The farm can generate up to 800 gallons of water a day, a number so practical it almost feels obscene in a story like this, because hosting is not only music and sentiment. Hosting is bathrooms. Hosting is hand washing. Hosting is making sure the basic machinery of being human doesn't fail when the crowd arrives. And the crowd does arrive. Cars come up the drive as twilight thickens, tail lights glow red through bare branches, doors open, voices spill out. People stand for a moment and look around the way people do when they're on someone else's land, admiring, cautious, excited. They are guests in a private world, and they know it. And the knowledge makes them gentler for a while. They drift toward the pavilion, pulled by light and sound check and the low murmur of others gathering. Coats brush, hands hold cups. Somebody laughs too loud and then softens it, remembering where they are. And all the while the farm is doing what it has learned to do, swallowing a crowd without looking strained. This is the reinvention right here. The farm isn't just a fortress anymore. It is a place where money and meaning mingle, a place where a night of songs becomes a night of fundraising, a place where art is not only entertainment, but leverage. The cause has numbers attached to it, numbers that turn emotion into reality. Charity care tallies that can reach nearly $1.5 million a year for the organization they're supporting. Numbers like that are why people put on coats and drive out in the cold and sit in folding chairs and listen. They want to be part of something that costs something. And the hosts, Vince and Amy, move through the evening like people who know the difference between a performance and a responsibility. They smile, they greet, they stand where they're meant to stand. But behind all of it is the knowledge, private, heavy, that life can fracture on a pothole, that a mind can disappear for 10 minutes, that healing can demand 12 to 18 months, that a throat can require 5 hours under a surgeon's light. That knowledge changes the meaning of a gathering. It makes every ordinary laugh feel borrowed. Was it generosity, or was it defiance? Because opening your gates after you've learned how fragile everything is, that is not naive kindness. That is a choice made in full awareness of risk. To welcome the world in anyway, to refuse to shrink your life down to something small enough to protect. The music starts. It always does. Cables carry signal, speakers carry breath, and a crowd holds still together the way crowds sometimes can when they remember they're human. Words rise into the cold air and hang there. People clap. Some wipe their eyes. Some just stare, letting the sound do whatever it's going to do inside them. And then, like all nights, it ends. Chairs scrape. Cars file out. Tail lights thread down the drive like embers fading. Volunteers return to work, stacking, sweeping, hauling trash, restoring the place to quiet. The gate will close again. The farm will go back to being private, but it won't be the same kind of private, not after you've turned it into a public good, even for a night. Not after you've learned you can't buy safety, only shape your response to danger. And that's where the next question waits, harder than the last. When a farm becomes sanctuary and stage, charity engine and family refuge, what happens next? Do you keep opening the gates on faith alone? Or do you start putting the legacy into paperwork, into structures, into ownership that can outlive the bodies that built it? They say legacy is a song that a man sings long enough and true enough, and the world will carry him forward like a melody you can't get out of your head. They say the farm is just a backdrop for that. Pretty land behind the legend, a quiet epilogue, a soft place to watch the sun go down. But the truth is, legacy in America is not a chorus. It's a file folder. It's a desk in a quiet office where the air smells like toner and old carpet and the faint medicinal bite of stale coffee. It's a county map laid out flat, the paper so wide it needs 2 hands to hold it down. It's a surveyor's grid, stamped with numbers and angles, lines that pretend the earth is obedient. It's a lawyer speaking in calm syllables about things nobody wants to think about while they're still alive. It's the difference between owning something and controlling what happens to it when you're gone. Outside, Tennessee is green in the months when it wants to be generous, and gray in the months when it remembers it can be cruel. Out on the farm, the pavilion sits solid on its hill, 111 feet long, 28 feet tall, as if it grew there. More than 470 pieces of southern pine timber and glulam, making a roof that will outlive a lot of the people who sit beneath it. More than 30,000 board feet of material hauled, cut, lifted, and joined so that songs can float in the air without wind tearing them apart. A place built to feel timeless, but built by invoices and schedules and labor crews that went home sore each night. A pavilion like that is not just wood. It's liability. It's maintenance. It's insurance. It's a promise you have to keep paying for. And the farm itself, whatever acreage it truly holds, whatever the boundaries are, exists inside a county and a culture that has learned to chew land into money. Every year, there are more cars, more traffic, more construction, but more people trying to buy their own slice of quiet with a mortgage and a manicured hedge. Land gets valuable enough that it starts to behave like a living predator. It attracts attention. It attracts arguments. It attracts the kind of paperwork that can turn family love into legal war. So the reinvention begins, not with music, but with ownership. You sit down at a table and start naming things the way a man names cattle in a ledger. House, barn, pavilion, water system, equipment, accounts, intellectual property. The words catalog and rights and valuation enter the room like strangers who think they belong there. Because the farm isn't the only asset. It never was. A career in music, if it lasts decades, does what oil does for the man who owns the mineral rights. It keeps paying long after the first work is done. Songs written in one year can keep feeding you in another year when your voice is tired, your knees hurt, and the road feels like punishment. That's the American miracle and the American trap. You can turn art into property, and then property into security, but only if you structure it right. Only if you don't let the whole thing get scattered by taxes, lawsuits, bad management, or family confusion. So the lawyer asks questions that sound simple and are anything but. Who owns the land on paper? Who owns the improvements, the pavilion, the structures, the systems? Who owns the brand value attached to the name? If something happens, who has authority? Who decides? Who signs? The pen matters here. The pen is the weapon and the shield. A signature on a deed can move a lifetime of work from one set of hands to another in 10 seconds. The ink goes down dark and wet, and then it dries, and suddenly the land is not simply yours. The way a child thinks of ownership, it's held, structured, protected, sometimes hidden inside an entity with a sterile name, letters that mean nothing to the human heart, but everything to the courts. And you can feel the cynicism of it, can't you? The way America forces you to translate love into legal language, the way a man has to think about death in order to protect life. Out on the farm, they keep doing what they've been doing. They host, they gather, they raise money. The dates keep stacking like fence posts. May 13th, 2021. The first concert at the new pavilion, the place stepping into public life. Late July 2022, the bicycle accident, about 10 minutes of unconsciousness, the home becoming a recovery zone. 5 hours under surgical light later on, the voice relearned, the body humbled. December 2nd, 2024, another night at the farm where music turns into care, where the machine of hospitality runs again. And the farm systems keep insisting on their own reality. Water doesn't care about fame. Water cares about capacity. A property that can produce up to 800 gallons a day is not playing at self-sufficiency. It's investing in it. It's building redundancy the way a man builds a second fence because he learned the first one can fail. That is what money does when it's been frightened. It fortifies. And underneath all that fortification is a lesson the farm keeps teaching, over and over, if you're willing to hear it. The world is not stable. The flood comes, the storm comes, the accident comes, the body fails in ways you cannot predict. In this country, we like to pretend stability is a personal virtue, like if you're careful enough, smart enough, disciplined enough, you can earn immunity. But immunity is a myth. So you don't just build a pavilion, you don't just buy land. You plan for the day when you can't lift a hammer, can't drive the tractor, can't step onto a stage without help. You plan for the day when the farm becomes a legacy, not because you want it to, but because time insists. And that's where the real question creeps in, quiet as dusk. Because once the papers are signed and the property is protected and the name is turned into something that can outlive the body, the story stops being about land and starts being about people. When the quiet is finally secured in ink, When the sanctuary is boxed up in law and finance, who inherits the peace? And who inherits the burden that peace was built on? They'll tell you inheritance is a blessing, that the children of a famous life get handed a warm loaf of security and all they have to do is slice it clean. They'll tell you the farm is a gift, green land, quiet skies, a pavilion on a hill, and that the next generation will simply step into it the way you step into a well-made coat. But inheritance, in a place like this, is also a sentence. It's a responsibility disguised as romance. And the first time you understand that is not at a lawyer's office. It's at a kitchen table, late, when the house has gone quiet and the adults have stopped pretending they aren't afraid. By the time Amy and Vince marry in 2000, they aren't young people building from nothing. They're adults with histories and the weight of past lives already inside them. She brings 3 children from her first marriage. He brings a daughter from his. Then, in 2001, they have a child together. One more life tied to the same piece of ground, the same family machine, the same American bargain between love and logistics. That's 5 kids with 5 separate relationships to the same household. 5 separate memories of what home means. And if you've lived in a blended family, you know there is no such thing as a neutral inheritance. There is only the inheritance each child believes they're owed, whether they say it out loud or not. It doesn't start with greed. It starts with tone. It starts with who knows the farm best, who feels most comfortable walking the property without asking, who knows which gate sticks when it's cold, who knows the rhythm of the place, the way it changes with season, with storms, with schedules. It starts with who feels like an insider and who feels like a guest. Those feelings don't show up on a deed, but they govern families more reliably than law ever will. And the farm itself has its own demands. A pavilion that's 111 feet long and 28 feet tall doesn't care about family harmony. It cares about upkeep. A structure built from more than 30,000 board feet of timber doesn't hold itself together on good intentions. You can hand down ownership, but you can't hand down the appetite of weather. Roofs need inspection. Drainage needs attention. Systems age. The land is always trying to return to wildness, and if no one pushes back, it wins. So the question becomes, who pushes back after you're gone? That's where the human cost sets in, and it's rarely dramatic. It's slow, it's quiet. It's a phone call that starts polite and ends tense. It's a holiday gathering where someone mentions the future, and the room gets colder, even with the fire lit. It's an email from an attorney that arrives in the morning like a rattlesnake on the porch, silent until you step too close. When the accident happens in late July 2022, the bicycle, the pothole, the 10 minutes of unconsciousness, it doesn't just injure a body, it forces a family to look at time, not as an idea, but as a threat. The farm becomes more than a place to live. It becomes a question of what happens when the people who made it meaningful can no longer run it, because running it is not symbolic work. It's real work. It's deciding whether to keep opening the gates for nights like December 2nd, 2024, when the farm hosts a charitable event tied to nearly $1.5 million in annual care. Number big enough to make the thing feel righteous, even necessary. It's deciding whether the farm will remain a sanctuary or become a permanent civic platform. It's deciding whether the pavilion stays active, whether the calendar stays full, whether the family continues to tie its private identity to public obligation. And every decision has a cost. If the farm keeps hosting, someone has to manage it, not someone in the abstract. A person, a name, a child eventually, or a manager hired by the family, or a committee of relatives who don't agree on anything except that they want control. If the farm stops hosting, that also costs, because purpose, once established, doesn't vanish politely. Communities remember, people ask, they assume the worst. And then the farm becomes what it was always in danger of becoming, not a refuge, but a rumor. So the couple sits at the table and talks about things couples hate talking about. They talk about paperwork, about who can sign what, about what happens if one of them can't make decisions, about medical directives and authority, and the hard reality that love does not automatically grant legal power. They talk about protecting the children from confusion and protecting the estate from the hungry mouth of the state, because America is romantic about family and brutally practical about taxes. And you can hear, beneath the words, the deeper fear, not death, exactly. People get used to the idea of death in a distant way, but disability, uncertainty, the slow erosion of ability, the possibility that one of them might still be alive and yet unable to keep the machinery running. That's what the concussion taught them. That's what the surgery taught them. That bodies can fail in ways that don't make headlines but change everything. Now put yourself in the children's place. Some of them grew up with fame as background noise. Some of them learned early that the phone ringing could mean a tour schedule, a security concern, a fan, a reporter, a stranger who thinks they own a piece of you. Some of them learned to share their parents with the public and call it normal. Some of them grew up with the farm as the one place that felt like it belonged to them alone, and then watched that place become a venue, a cause, a community gathering ground. A child can be proud of that and resent it at the same time. Pride and resentment are cousins. They sit at the same table. And the invisible workforce sees all of it. The staff, the grounds people, the folks who keep things running. Those are the ones who can tell you when a family is under strain. Not because they gossip, but because strain changes routines. It changes who shows up. It changes who gives instructions and who stays silent. It changes the way a property feels at sunrise. The great man story, if you want to tell it that way, would say Vince built something and now his heirs will carry it forward. But the truth is, the something is not just his. It's hers. It's the workers. It's the neighbors who tolerate traffic when events happen. It's the volunteers who show up in the cold. It's the donors who come because the name on the invitation matters. And that's the cruelty of legacy. It asks the heirs to maintain not only a property, but a public expectation. They inherit a place that looks like peace and functions like a small institution. They inherit the pride of it and the weight. So the family keeps going, smiling at gatherings, hosting when they host, protecting what they can, making choices that will never satisfy everyone. The farm stays green. The pavilion stands, the water runs, the gate opens sometimes and closes again. But under it all is the one truth no lawyer can file away. This is a story about America's favorite dream, turning talent into land, turning land into safety, turning safety into legacy. And the way that dream always collides with the simple fact that life is fragile. So when the last papers are signed and the last decisions are made and the heirs are standing on that hill looking out at the same Middle Tennessee view their parents once believed could protect them, what will they really be looking at? Inheritance or a mirror held up to the country that taught all of us to confuse ownership with permanence? They'll tell you the farm is the truth. That when the noise finally dies down and the touring stops and the suits and schedules lose their grip, a person returns to what's real: dirt, grass, wood, water, a porch, a view, a life reduced to its honest parts. But the truth isn't a place. The truth is a moment, and moments don't hold still. The morning comes back again, the one you could smell in the beginning, dew on the grass, the low hush that hangs over a property before the day's engines start. Before the first truck turns onto gravel, before the first voice rises to fill the air. The barn still smells of old pine and dust, and that faint sweetness of hay stored up against a season that doesn't care if you're ready. A bird still tests the day with the same 3 notes, as if it's asking the land a question the land has answered for centuries. The house sits back from the road the way it always has, turned inward, built for quiet the way some people build for war. The driveway still curves, the trees still hold their line, the view still reaches out over Middle Tennessee like an open hand, and on mornings like this, you can almost believe in the myth again. You can almost believe this place is a final shelter, that it stands outside the world's reach, that the gate in the distance and the money turned into timber and stone can hold back what frightens us. Then the phone rings, not literally every time. Sometimes it's a headline, sometimes it's a doctor, sometimes it's a memory that wakes you at 3 in the morning, sharp as a splinter, but the feeling is the same. The world intrudes, the world insists, the world reminds you that nothing you own can stop time from doing what it does. That is what this story has been beneath all the names and dates and structures, a contest between control and contingency. A man takes songs, air, breath, the invisible, and turns them into something that can buy land. A woman takes a voice and turns it into a life that can host strangers and raise money and build a pavilion on a hill. The farm becomes a vault for peace. The pavilion becomes a stage for purpose. The water system becomes a fortress against the small daily failures that can ruin a night. The gates open and close like lungs, and then the body breaks in the most mundane way possible. One pothole, one moment of physics asserting itself, and the whole architecture of certainty reveals its flaw. 10 minutes. That's the number that stays with you because 10 minutes is so little you can waste it without thinking, and so enormous you can lose a life inside it. 10 minutes of darkness on a city street, and the farm, this grand, curated, expensive idea of safety, suddenly becomes what it always was, a place where you return to heal, not a place that prevents harm. 12 to 18 months. That's the number that teaches humility, the long horizon, the slow weather of recovery, the truth that you can't hustle your way out of a head injury, you can't outwork biology, you can only live inside its rules. 5 hours. That's the number that makes a waiting room feel like a confessional. 5 hours under surgical light, 5 hours while a spouse sits with coffee that tastes like burnt plastic, watching doors, listening to footsteps, learning again what helplessness feels like. And through it all, the farm holds the shape of stability. Grass grows, timbers stand. The pavilion remains 111 feet long and 28 feet tall, indifferent to human fear. The roofline doesn't tremble because a family is worried. The land doesn't change its color because a mind is healing. Nature keeps its own schedule. That's the part that makes the story American and ancient at the same time. We build, and the world continues. We pour meaning into property, and the property remains mostly uninterested in our meaning. The earth does not admire us. It tolerates us. So what does this tell us, standing at the edge of that hill while the light softens and the day becomes quieter again? It tells us that America's most seductive fantasy, turning success into land, turning land into permanence, is only half true. Land can outlast you. A pavilion can outlast you. A well-written agreement can outlast you. A name can linger, but none of it can guarantee the one thing people are truly trying to buy, a stable life inside a fragile body. And yet, still, they built it. Still, they hosted. Still, they opened the gates on cold nights and let music and strangers and money for care move through their private world. Still, they chose the difficult generosity of letting the outside world touch their sanctuary. That is not naive. That is not simple. That is a kind of courage that looks ordinary until you understand what it risks. If you want to deconstruct the great man, you have to be honest. The farm is not one person's achievement. It is a web of hands. Builders lifting timbers, groundskeepers pushing back against entropy, volunteers directing cars, nurses and surgeons putting the human body back together one careful act at a time, a community showing up because a cause needs money, and a song can open wallets in ways statistics cannot. This is how empires really stand, not on legend, but on labor, not on the myth, but on the quiet daily cost paid by people whose names do not go on the gate. And now the morning returns again. Dew, silence. The bird's 3 notes, the house turned inward, the barn's scent, the driveway curving like a gentle lie, the view holding steady as if it has always been this way, as if it will always be this way. You can feel the camera pulling back now, past the pavilion on the hill, past the fence lines, past the trees, past the long gravel drive. The farm gets smaller as the world gets larger. The roads appear. The city beyond appears. The ordinary places where accidents happen and where recovery happens and where lives unfold without ceremony. And the question that remains, quiet, persistent, impossible to sign away, is this. When you look at a story like this, do you believe the legend of sanctuary and simple truth? Or do you believe the colder truth that legacy is just what we build to distract ourselves from how little we control? And whose story did you decide was true?